Hello everyone and welcome back to the color page. Today we're gonna have a closer look at the primary color controls. Let's jump into DaVinci Resolve. The primary color controls, they are located at the left, the bottom part of your screen. If you have been working with something like Premiere or Final Cut, you have to be familiar with them, but the naming is different. For example, instead of shadows, we have lift. Instead of midtones, we have gamma, and instead of highlights, we have gain. Names are different, the basic principle is the same. The way how they work is easy to demonstrate on a grayscale. So we have a grayscale in here, waveform demonstrates that it's going from the black to the white. And I'm going to show you how it works once you start twisting, turning everything in here. For example, we want to adjust the brightness of our shadows. We're gonna turn this slider, and as you can see, we are changing the brightness of our shadows. But when we're changing the brightness of the shadows, we're also pulling the midtones and the highlights as well, because this is primary controls, and we need to start with primary controls when we color grade, because this is the most non-destructive way how you can color grade your image. The same thing with the gamma. Once you turn and twist the gamma, it is going to mostly affect the gamma, but it's going to pull the shadows and the highlights as well. And the same thing goes to the highlights, to the gain. Now we have the offset slider. Offset is going to affect all of them. It's going to affect gain, gamma, and lift all at the same time. As I'm talking about the exposure, but it goes to the color as well. You can change the color, and if you're changing the color of their midtones, for example, you can see that it mostly affects the midtones. The same goes for lift. It mostly affects the shadows, and the same goes for the highlights. These are your primary controls. Below those circles, we can see the numerical display of our exposure, red, green, and blue channels. They are displayed to the second number after the dot, but actually you can change them up to the third number. It's just not displayed. Now let's talk about these controls that are located over and under our color wheels. Temperature is going to allow us to add either blue or the orange. So it is going from -4000 to 4000 and allows you to add either blue or orange to change your color temperature. Tint, you can add a tint, pretty straightforward in here, nothing really complicated. Now the contrast. Contrast is going to create the S-curve. As you can see on our waveform, this is the same thing as if I were to do this. This is doing absolutely the same thing, but it is got a pivot point. So if I increase contrast and change the pivot point allows me to change the point at which this S-shaped curve is going to occur. So you can drag it to the left to the shadow portion, or you can drag it to the right to the highlight portion, depending on what kind of image you've got. Mid detail, it's going to increase the local contrast or to decrease the local contrast of the image. When the 2 points, they have the contrast, it's going to increase it. I'm going to demonstrate it on an image that makes sense. If you increase the midtone detail, it's going to make it sharper. If you decrease it, it's going to, decrease the sharpness of the details. Now, the bottom portion, color boost. Color boost is very similar to saturation, but saturation adds saturation to all of the portions of the video clip. If you increase this, it's going to uniformly add saturation to all of the portions of the video. Color boost, on the other hand, is going to add more saturation to the least saturated parts and less saturation to the more saturated parts. If you increase this, it's going to work like vibrance. If you are familiar with vibrance in Photoshop or Lightroom, it's going to work the same. Now, let's get back to our grayscale. Now shadows, you can lift the shadows really quickly without going to lift. It's going to affect only shadows. The same thing is for highlights. You can reduce or increase the intensity of the highlights. Now hue, it is going to rotate all of the hues of our image around the circle of hues. I'm going to show you how it's working on the image like this. So it's going to change all of the hues around the circle. Well, it can be really useful when you're isolating a certain color and then changing it to a different color. Oops. Now the Luma mix. The Luma mix is something that is not that straightforward, but I'm going to demonstrate you what is happening with the Luma mix. I'm going to display Rgb Parade and show you why Rgb Parade. This additional line is showing us the brightness, red, green, and blue channels, and also the brightness. And if I'm changing with the Luma Mix 100 something in the gain, it is going, for example, I'm pushing my gain towards something like blue. It is going to affect all of the channels. It is easier to show you in here. If I'm reducing the green, for example, it is going to increase the blue and the red to make the exposure, to maintain it at the same level. It is constantly adjusting to my corrections. But if I reduce the Luma Mix to 0, it is not going to do that. It is going to work completely independently. And the luminance values, the exposure is going to change with the changing of the color. But two other colors, they are not going to be affected that much. Typically, I would leave this parameter at 100, and if you need to fine-tune something and you do not really care about your exposure, you can drag it towards 0. Let's go to YRGB and let's go to waveform. This is the Luma mix. Now, the primary color wheels have a different way how you can look at them. It is called color bars. This is absolutely the same thing as the color wheels, but presented just differently. On the other hand, when you go to the log wheels, it is completely different, although it looks pretty much the same. And as you can see, the naming is different. Here we have lift, gamma, gain, and here we have shadows, midtones, and highlights. And they are going to affect differently. But how? If you reduce, for example, the intensity of the highlights, it is going to affect only the highlights. And by using this range, if you watch closely the waveform, you're gonna change this pivot point. This way you can affect the portions of your video clip in a very controlled way. The same thing goes to the shadows. If we change something within the shadow slider, and by using this range, you can affect where it is going to happen. So it is a very controlled way how you can color grade. Not color grade by fine-tune the image, because the main color grading will be happening in the primary color wheels, so you wouldn't just break something in your image. And the log color wheels are there for you to fine-tune your image. Now, the offset. We have something that is called the... by the way, I wanted to show you how these controls are overlapping. For example, we have in here the graph that is going to show us how these controls are overlapping. In the primary color wheels, this graph shows that the gamma, lift, and gain are severely overlapping each other. That's why if you make correction to the lift or to the gamma, you're gonna pull gain and lift as well. But when we go to the log wheels, you can see that they are barely overlapping. That's why you can make correction to the shadows and not affect midtones at all. This is the plus and the advantage of the log wheels. Now let's talk about the printer lights. Printer lights is the offset. It means that when you adjust in the colors within your offset, you can see that there is no luminance bar in here. We have luminance bar in gain, in gamma, in lift, but we do not have luminance bar in offset. This is because offset only works as if Lumamix was drawn to 0. It is always going to affect a certain color independently of each other. And this is really useful because it is easy to fine-tune your image this way. If you do not have a specialized keyboard for color grading, and I assume if you're watching the beginner tutorial you do not have the keyboard, you can use the shortcuts that are available inside of DaVinci to fine-tune your printer lights. You can go to color and enable printer light hotkeys. And these are all of the printer light hotkeys. And if you use your numpad, you can press just 1, 2, 3, 5, 4, 7, yada yada, to adjust your image to fine-tune it. These are the printer lights. You're gonna use it a lot to fine-tune your image. Now, when you're lacking the control, you need even more control that the log wheels can give you. You can go to the Hdr wheels. These are designed to allow you to fine-tune and control certain areas of the image, and which areas you decide for yourself. For example, if I click in here, it is going to display a certain area that I can affect using these Hdr wheels. Let me demonstrate any image. For example, I can press in here and I can see that I'm going to affect all the brightest portions of the screen, but I do not want to include his skin. What I do, I move to the highlights. Now I'm going to affect all of the brightest portions and exclude his skin. That's why I can move this towards blue, and it's going to affect only the brightest portions. But you can see that this creates this gray line. I do not really want that. So what do? I can use this slider to fine-tune the area that is going to be affected by these Hdr color wheels. So if you're really need to fine-tune the colors in your image, you can use these Hdr color wheels. The basic principles of how they work is pretty much the same as we discussed before, but it gives you more control. You can also display it like this. This is zone graph, and you can move between zones and determine where you would like to stop. For example, I change these highlights and I want them to propagate like to something like this. Then I would leave it in here and I have a lot of control. You can increase the fall off, so it's going to affect a wide area. So yeah, experiment with this and you can have a lot of control in there. These are Hdr color wheels. So this is pretty much all I wanted to talk about. Yeah, thank you for watching, thank you for being here, and goodbye. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.